Beyond the gate, spoilers tease that Bill will soon begin to notice strange behavior from his wife. Hayley changes that seem subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But something is off. Ever since the news broke about Kenny's death, Hayley has seemed disconnected, emotionally distant. She zones out during conversations. Her hands tremble when someone mentions Kenny's name. Her eyes, usually so quick to challenge or reassure, now seem hollow. At first, Bill tries to write it off as stress or grief. But the pattern persists. Bill begins to observe Hayley more closely. She skips meals. She starts leaving the house at odd hours without explanation. When she returns, her clothes smell faintly of soil or rust. She stops answering calls from mutual friends. The warmth between them has disappeared. Bill, trained to sense threats from a mile away due to his years in law enforcement, can no longer ignore what he's seeing inside his own home. He starts following her. At first, she doesn't make it easy. Hayley is careful, always looking over her shoulder, taking different routes to what should be simple errands. But eventually, Bill catches her entering an abandoned greenhouse on the outskirts of town. He waits outside for nearly 40 minutes. When she emerges, she's not alone. She's with a man tall, in his mid-30s, with a jagged scar above his brow. Bill stays hidden, watching from the cover of trees, heart pounding. He pulls out his phone and records part of the conversation, the audio muffled but enough to catch fragments. Hayley says something about a step too far and the dosage. The man responds, frustrated, "You're too close now to back out." He deserves it. You know what he did. Bill's breath catches. That night, he doesn't sleep. He replays the recording again and again, his brain piecing together what his heart is already screaming. Hayley is hiding something dangerous. He checks their shared calendar, her prescriptions, even their food inventory. Then he finds the glass bottle, hidden in the back of the spice rack, mislabeled. Inside, a clear liquid. He takes it to a lab contact under the table. The analysis returns with no registered compound match. It's odorless, tasteless, and undetectable by standard medical scans. But the chemical breakdown reveals something far worse. This is slow-acting. Cell degradation, immune compromise, memory confusion. The victim wouldn't die immediately. Instead, they would decline over weeks, maybe months. A gradual collapse that looked like age, fatigue, or stress. It matches exactly what Bill has been experiencing. Dizziness, fatigue, shortness of breath, hair loss, joint pain. His collapse at the council event weeks earlier, Hayley had dismissed it as dehydration. He had believed her. Now he knows better. The betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. This woman who nursed him, who held his hand during recovery, had been feeding him poison. Bill confronts her the next day. He doesn't ask questions. He sets the recording on the table. He places the bottle beside it. Then he sits across from her, staring silently until her defenses begin to crack. Hayley doesn't deny it. Her eyes go glassy, her hands tremble. But what she says next makes Bill feel like he's stepped into someone else's nightmare. It was for Kenny. Hayley speaks, not with rage but with cold resolve. Kenny was her cousin. Her real cousin. Raised in secret, moved from home to home, abandoned by everyone including, she claims, by Bill. Bill had worked with Vernon and Martin. He had helped silence Kenny's voice. Hayley had watched from the sidelines as Kenny tried to tell the truth, only to be met with threats and manipulation. When he died, Hayley lost everything. The grief turned to purpose. Revenge. She tells Bill that their entire relationship was a constructed plan. She had met him on purpose. Pushed his buttons. Learned his weak points. Befriended Danny, then quietly fed information that led to their divorce. She didn't seduce Bill. She targeted him. Bill feels physically ill. Everything about his life with Hayley was a lie. He lunges. Not to hurt her, but to stop her from fleeing. They struggle. Glass shatters. Hayley grabs a knife from the counter, but Bill disarms her and pins her to the floor. She screams. But there are no neighbors nearby. No one will come running. In the aftermath, Bill calls the police. Not his former colleagues. Not the local precinct. But the FBI contact who had been working behind the scenes during the Kenny investigation. Within hours, Hayley is in custody. The man she met at the greenhouse is arrested 2 towns over. He confesses immediately. Claims he was just the courier, the supplier. But he confirms that Hayley was the orchestrator. Every step of it. During questioning, Hayley refuses a lawyer. She confesses everything. She talks about Kenny as a child. His fear. His intelligence. His warnings. She says that when she learned Bill had helped cover for Martin, it shattered something in her. Not just rage but disappointment. She had once admired him. Respected him. Wanted to believe he had been forced into it. But he hadn't. He chose convenience over justice. The trial captures national attention. Hayley is portrayed as a tragic antihero by some, a cold-blooded manipulator by others. But the facts are irrefutable. She had planned a murder. Slow, deliberate, and methodical. The sentence is harsh. Life without parole. Bill sits in the back of the courtroom as the gavel drops, feeling no satisfaction. Just exhaustion. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his marriage, and even himself has been dismantled. After the sentencing, he disappears for weeks. No contact. No statements. Just silence. Then, one morning, a small envelope arrives at the legal office where Kenny's files had been processed. Inside is a note, handwritten. I believed I was the hero in my own story. I wasn't. Kenny was. This is for him. Attached is a flash drive. The files on it include recordings, journals, and private confessions Bill had made during the months he realized what Hayley had done. It includes documents Vernon had sent him, digital logs of Martin's movements, even old letters from Kenny's youth. Together, they form a complete narrative of everything that had been hidden, not just about Kenny's death, but the long chain of abuses that had started years before. The flash drive becomes the basis of a formal justice reform initiative. It is shown to law students, political figures, and communities across the country. It is called the Bill Hamilton Files. And through them, the truth finally becomes undeniable. The truth Hayley tried to enforce with poison, and Bill tried to correct with confession. The story, as always, circles back to Kenny. Even in death, he refused to be silenced. Hayley refused to appeal the sentence. When her lawyer suggested it, she simply stared out the small window of her cell and shook her head. Her trial was over, but her war with the past had only just begun in her own mind. Every day she sat in silence, refusing visitors, writing page after page of a memoir she never intended to publish. In it, she chronicled everything, not just what she had done to Bill, but what had been done to Kenny. She documented every silence, every overlooked moment, every time power was chosen over truth. Her cellmate, a former nurse with a history of whistleblowing gone wrong, became her sole confidant. Hayley shared pieces of Kenny's story, and in return, the nurse showed her how to endure prison politics without folding. In many ways, Hayley had already served time long before she was arrested. Her entire marriage to Bill had been a sentence in itself, a life built on manipulation, even if justified in her own mind. Outside, the town still buzzed with aftershocks. Bill's disappearance after the trial left more questions than answers. But a pattern emerged. Every few weeks, someone from Bill's past received an envelope. Not from a return address, but from Bill himself. Danny received one first. Inside was a handwritten apology. Not just for the way their marriage ended, but for how he allowed himself to become complicit in a machine that destroyed people like Kenny. With the letter came a check, a significant amount, and a list of charities and initiatives Bill had quietly funded in Kenny's name. It was Bill's attempt at restoration, however incomplete. Martin, still serving time in a separate facility, received his envelope next. No money. Just a photo. It showed Kenny, years younger, at a public rally holding a sign that read, "Truth doesn't ask for permission." On the back of the photo, in Bill's shaky handwriting, was a single sentence, "You knew. You let it happen." "I won't." The gesture wasn't forgiveness. It was a verdict. In the wake of the trial, journalists returned to the story, digging deeper into Hayley's connections. Her upbringing had been difficult. Her father institutionalized. Her mother disappeared. She had been raised largely by Kenny's side of the family, but the relationship had always been shadowed by fear and secrecy. When Kenny died, Hayley's resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about honoring someone who had always stood up for her when no one else did. Ted, who had stayed out of the spotlight since his own conviction years earlier, resurfaced only when subpoenaed for a secondary hearing regarding the handling of Kenny's initial investigation. He tried to withhold comment, but mounting pressure and the renewed attention on Hayley's motive forced his hand. His testimony implicated even more officials, revealing how far the corruption extended. For the first time, the town council voted to disband itself and rebuild. Elijah, still living under the radar after the events surrounding Kenny's funeral, emerged quietly to meet with Danny. They spoke for 3 hours behind closed doors. When Danny left, she was visibly emotional but firm. Later that week, she made a public statement announcing a new foundation in Kenny's name, co-funded by Elijah. Its mission, to support victims of judicial corruption and slow-burn poisoning, a direct call-out to the method Hayley had used. Hayley, hearing of the foundation from prison, simply nodded when the news reached her. It was never about clearing her name. She had no illusions about that. But if Kenny's name could live on in something meaningful, it made her confinement bearable. The courthouse where Bill had once worked was renamed. The nameplate read, Kenneth Ellison Justice Hall. Underneath, a quote, "Silence is the ally of injustice." Students came to visit the building from across the country. Kenny's story became a case study in law schools, his death a benchmark in ethics debates. But it wasn't his death alone that sparked change. It was the complexity surrounding it, people who tried to erase it, the woman who tried to avenge it, and the man who finally admitted his place in it. In the final weeks of Hayley's life, because prison did not halt the consequences of the poison she had long been exposed to during testing, she wrote a final letter. Addressed to no one. Meant for everyone. You think I was a monster? Maybe I was. Maybe vengeance is just another kind of evil. But what would you have done if the world you trusted buried someone you loved? What would you have done if you had no voice, no proof, and no one left? I did the only thing I knew. And I never asked to be understood. I only asked that he not be forgotten. The letter was found by the warden after her passing and shared publicly against protocol. It went viral within hours. Debates flared again. Was Hayley a villain, a victim, or both? But for those closest to the story, it didn't matter. The system had cracked open. A man named Kenny had died trying to tell the truth. A woman named Hayley had died ensuring the world finally listened. And a man named Bill, lost in his own reckoning, had finally done the right thing, not by surviving, but by choosing to be the last witness who spoke when everyone else stayed quiet. From that silence came something else, change. Lasting, painful, necessary change. And at the center of it all, the name no one would ever bury again, Kenny. The seasons turned slowly over the town that had once buried the truth. In the absence left by Hayley's death and Bill's withdrawal, the community took a long, trembling breath. It had faced fire, betrayal, murder, and poison, but it had survived. What remained now was the long, uneven process of becoming something better. Danny stood outside the Justice Hall, now bearing Kenny's name, as a group of young students arrived for their first ethics field lecture. The foundation she co-founded with Elijah was thriving. They offered internships, legal guidance, and trauma support services across 3 counties. Danny had never thought she'd return to public work after her divorce, but this wasn't about her anymore. This was about legacy. Kenny's, Hayley's, even Bill's, fractured and difficult though it was. That afternoon, she received a letter. No return address. Inside was a photo of Hayley in her prison uniform, smiling faintly with a child's drawing taped to the wall behind her. The drawing was of a tree, with 2 figures beneath it and the name Kenny in big, messy letters across the trunk. Scribbled at the bottom, in Hayley's handwriting, some roots grow even after the tree falls. Bill had sent it. That much was clear. He was living in a remote fishing village, helping run a dock, fixing boats by day and reading court transcripts by night. His days were quiet now, unremarkable. But the guilt never fully left him. He spoke occasionally at small-town community forums under an alias, describing the slow rot of compromise. It doesn't start with evil, he'd say. It starts with one favor. One silence. One lie. His words never named names, but everyone in those rooms knew who he was. Elijah, still based near the state capitol, had begun mentoring young law students who came from broken systems. He rarely brought up Kenny by name anymore, not because he wanted to forget, but because he wanted to teach through purpose, not grief. When he did speak of Kenny, it was always with reverence, not as a martyr, but as someone who never gave up. Once a year, Elijah returned to the cemetery. He brought 2 flowers, one for Kenny, one for Hayley. He never stayed long. Just long enough to whisper something no one else could hear. Then he'd walk away, shoulders squared, the weight lighter with each visit. A documentary finally aired, years after Hayley's case. It didn't sensationalize her story. Instead, it framed the broader cost of silence and the ways people weaponize power. One particular scene moved audiences around the country, a voiceover from Hayley's final letter playing over footage of the tree mural in the Justice Hall, surrounded by children drawing truth branches with chalk. The mural had expanded. Now, along with Kenny, other names lined the routes: whistleblowers, victims, the wrongly accused. Names that once disappeared now had a place. A living record. A surprising twist came when one of the students who had studied the case launched a program to identify slow-acting poisons in domestic abuse scenarios. Named Hayley. Hazardous agents yielding lethal effects in youth, it used forensic innovation inspired by her method not to replicate them, but to reverse engineer safety. Her name, once synonymous with destruction, now also became associated with protection. Martin died in prison. His final letter, addressed to Elijah and Danny, apologized not for what he did, but for how long he let it happen. "I was not a villain," he wrote. "But I was something worse. I was a coward with power." No public service was held. Only Danny attended his cremation. The school curriculum in the region now includes a module titled Systemic Justice and Legacy. It tells the story of the town, not as a warning, but as a roadmap. Students debate Hayley's ethics. They argue whether Bill's late redemption absolves his complicity. They research Kenny's early advocacy, his efforts to publish the truth, and how easy it had been to silence someone with no power. Some of them cry during those classes. And others leave inspired. 10 years later, on the anniversary of Kenny's death, Danny, Elijah, and a group of local leaders held a candlelight vigil. No cameras. No media. Just people. They didn't chant or rage. They listened. Names were spoken. Silences were honored. When the last candle burned down, Elijah stepped forward. He didn't speak from a podium. Just his voice, clear and low. "We thought this story ended with graves. But it didn't. It ended here. With you. With us. Not because we fixed everything, but because we never gave up trying." He looked up toward the mural, now illuminated by soft lights. Justice didn't win because of the courts. It won because someone kept telling the truth, even when no one wanted to hear it. That someone was Kenny. And he was never alone. The crowd stood in silence. Not mourning, but promising that no name would be buried again. And no lie would ever silence the truth.